If you enjoy powerful stories of family betrayal, resilience, purpose, power of community and revenge, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you'll get notified as soon as a new story is published. The smell of roasted turkey drifted through my little house on Gaston Street, curling into every corner the way it had every December since my Harold passed. I basted it slowly, spooning the golden juices across its crisping skin, the way he used to like. On the stove, sweet potato casserole bubbled under a marshmallow crust, cornbread stuffing baked in the oven, and 2 pecan pies cooled on the counter, their glossy tops catching the light. My dining table gleamed under the chandelier, cloth napkins folded into triangles, polished forks lined straight, wine glasses shimmering like tiny jewels. A table prepared for family. I paused at the doorway, just looking at it. I wanted to believe that sight alone might summon them home. My Michael, my eldest, forever chasing cases in Atlanta's high-rise towers. His wife, Vanessa, sharp tongue, sharper heels. And my Clara, my baby girl in New York, working so hard she barely remembered what sweet tea tasted like. I had pictured them walking through the door together, shaking off the Savannah chill, laughing, teasing me for fussing. I had imagined Michael loosening his tie, Clara stealing spoonfuls of casserole before dinner, Vanessa sighing but secretly enjoying it. I had imagined their voices filling this house, which had grown so quiet since Harold left. But the only sound was my phone buzzing against the counter. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked it up, and read the first message. Sorry, Mom. Can't make it. Something important came up. Michael. My chest tightened. My thumb trembled as I opened the next. Too much work. Maybe next time. Clara. 2 refusals. Cold. Blunt. No warmth, no regret, just words carved like blades. My knees went weak. I lowered myself into a chair and stared across the table at the untouched plates, the flickering candles, the turkey steaming in silence. The quiet roared louder than the freight trains that rattled down the tracks at night. I might have cried then, but something in me refused. Instead, I rose and poured myself a glass of wine, anything to steady my hands. That's when I noticed the voicemail notification blinking red on the screen. I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled my kitchen. Smooth, dismissive, cruel. Her food is trash. We're going to a real party. Nobody cares if she's sitting alone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words bounced off my walls and landed heavy in my chest. Trash. After decades of teaching other people's children all day, then coming home to cook for mine late into the night. After stretching one paycheck across bills and tuition. After simmering pots of gumbo that warmed them through winters, after frying chicken for every birthday, every victory, every heartbreak. Trash. I set the phone down slowly on the table, my fingers curling into fists before I let them uncurl again. The 6 chairs stared back at me, each one an empty witness to my humiliation. If family doesn't want me, I whispered into the stillness, maybe someone else does. The next morning, the knife twisted deeper. I stepped onto the porch to fetch the paper, the air sharp with December damp. Spanish moss swayed gently from the oaks, and a light mist rolled in from the river. That's when Mrs. Whitaker, my neighbor from 2 houses down, paused on her morning walk. She tugged her scarf tighter and called out. Evelyn, she said, I overheard Michael and Clara last night down at Broughton Street. They were talking about some fancy gala. Her face softened, but her words were daggers. Michael laughed and said, she's stuck in the past. Still cooking the same food like anyone cares. And Clara, poor thing, she chuckled along. I smiled politely, the way Southern women are raised to do, but inside I was falling through emptiness. Stuck in the past. Those words looped in my head like a cruel hymn. When Mrs. Whitaker walked on, I shut the door quietly and leaned against it, my breath ragged. I had braced myself for indifference, but mockery from the very children I had bled for, that cut deeper. Memories rose, merciless and sharp. Nights when Michael was in law school, and I stayed up grading papers until midnight just to afford his tuition. He never knew the hours, the exhaustion, the sacrifice. He only knew the degree and the tailored suit that followed. And Clara, my sweet Clara. I remembered the night she called crying from New York, rent overdue. I wired her money without hesitation, even though it meant I skipped paying my own power bill. I wrapped myself in blankets and told myself her comfort was worth my cold. I thought they'd carry me in their hearts. Instead, they carried only disdain. I stared at the untouched turkey still sitting on the table. The pie, half sliced. The feast that was meant for love but had turned into a monument of betrayal. Yet somewhere in that hollow ache, a spark flickered. Pride. Defiance. Or maybe just the stubborn grit that had carried me through every storm. I straightened my shoulders, reached for the phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Marjorie? I said when my old church friend picked up. If they won't eat my food, maybe the neighborhood will. Silence hung for a moment, then a laugh of approval. Now that, Marjorie said, is the Evelyn Carter I know. What are you thinking? And just like that, a seed was planted. I looked again at the feast spread across my lonely dining table. What had been meant for ungrateful children would become something else. A gift. A rebellion. My so-called trash would not go to waste. It would become a lifeline. And deep inside, I whispered to myself, let them laugh. They'll see soon enough what their mama's food can do. The smell of roasted turkey drifted through my little house on Gaston Street, curling into every corner the way it had every December since my Harold passed. I basted it slowly, spooning the golden juices across its crisping skin, the way he used to like. Every few minutes, I leaned in, watching the skin turn a shade deeper, from pale gold to bronze, and finally to that mahogany crisp that Harold used to call Sunday best brown. On the stove, sweet potato casserole bubbled, its marshmallow crust puffing up like clouds, a little caramel dripping over the edge of the glass dish. A pan of cornbread stuffing baked in the oven, rich with celery and sage, its scent weaving into every breath I took. 2 pecan pies cooled on the counter, their glossy tops catching the light like stained glass in a cathedral. The dining table gleamed under the chandelier Harold and I had picked out 40 years ago at a second-hand store. I'd polished it until my reflection winked back at me. Cloth napkins, real ones, not paper, were folded into triangles. Forks lined up with military precision. Wine glasses, clear and tall, shimmered with the faint glow of candlelight. A table prepared for family. I stood in the doorway of that dining room for longer than I'd care to admit, just taking it in. I wanted to believe that maybe the sight itself might summon them. My Michael, my eldest, always running from one client meeting to the next in his Atlanta skyscraper. His wife, Vanessa, all sharp tongue and sharper heels. And my Clara, my baby girl, now grown into a woman whose world revolved around New York deadlines and conference calls. I had pictured them walking through the door together. I could see it in my mind as clearly as if it had already happened. Michael loosening his tie, rolling his eyes but secretly smiling at how much food I'd made. Clara rushing into the kitchen, stealing spoonfuls of casserole before I could scold her. Vanessa clicking in behind them, pretending to be unimpressed but filling her plate high anyway. I had imagined laughter echoing in this house, the kind of laughter that smooths over all the years and distances between us. Since Harold's passing, these walls had grown too quiet. Too still. A family supper, I thought, could chase that silence away. But the only sound was my phone buzzing against the kitchen counter. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked it up, and read the first message. Sorry, Mom. Can't make it. Something important came up. Michael. My chest tightened. My thumb trembled as I opened the next. Too much work. Maybe next time. Clara. 2 refusals. Cold. Blunt. No warmth, no regret, just words carved sharp as knives. I sank into one of the chairs and stared across the table at the untouched plates, the flickering candles, the turkey steaming in silence. The quiet roared louder than the freight trains that rumbled down River Street at midnight. For a moment, I thought I might cry. But something in me, some stubborn pride born from years of keeping this family afloat, refused. Instead, I stood, walked back into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. Anything to steady my hands. That's when I noticed the voicemail notification. A little red bubble blinking on the screen. I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled my kitchen. Smooth, dismissive, cruel. Her food is trash. We're going to a real party. Nobody cares if she's sitting alone. The words echoed in that little house, bouncing off the walls and landing heavy in my chest. Trash. I stared at the counter, at the pies cooling, at the candles flickering in the dining room, and all at once, decades of memories came crashing in. The nights I taught school all day and then came home to cook for my children, still in my heels and stockings. The evenings when Harold and I skipped dinner so the kids could have second helpings. The time I stretched one paycheck to cover Michael's law school books, Clara's dance lessons, and the light bill. Trash, she said. I lowered the phone onto the table, my fingers curling into fists before slowly uncurling. The 6 chairs stared back at me, each one an empty witness to my humiliation. If family doesn't want me, I whispered into the stillness, maybe someone else does. The next morning, the knife twisted deeper. I stepped onto the porch to fetch the paper. The December air was sharp with damp, and a fog rolled off the river, clinging to the Spanish moss that draped from the oaks like old lace. That's when Mrs. Whitaker, my neighbor from 2 houses down, paused on her walk. She tugged her scarf tighter and called out. Evelyn, she said, I overheard Michael and Clara last night down at Broughton Street. They were talking about some fancy gala. Her face softened, but her words were daggers. Michael laughed and said, she's stuck in the past. Still cooking the same food like anyone cares. And Clara, poor thing, she chuckled along. I smiled politely, the way Southern women are trained to do, but inside I was falling through emptiness. Stuck in the past. Those words looped in my mind like a cruel hymn. When Mrs. Whitaker walked on, I shut the door quietly behind me and leaned against it, my breath ragged. I had braced myself for indifference, but mockery from the very children I had bled for, that cut deeper. Memories rose, merciless and sharp. Michael in law school, my hands raw from grading stacks of papers after midnight so I could afford his tuition. He never knew the hours, the exhaustion, the sacrifices. He only knew the framed degree and the tailored suit. Clara in her tiny New York apartment, whispering on the phone that she couldn't make rent. I wired her money that night, even though it meant I sat in the cold for weeks, wrapped in blankets instead of paying my own heating bill. I thought they'd remember. I thought they'd carry me in their hearts. Instead, they carried only disdain. I sat at the table again, staring at the turkey still sitting untouched, the pies cooling in silence. What was supposed to be a feast of love had become a monument of betrayal. And yet, in that hollow ache, something flickered. Pride. Defiance. Maybe just the stubborn grit that had carried me through every storm of my life. I straightened, stood tall, and picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad before pressing a number I hadn't dialed in months. Marjorie? I said when my old church friend answered. Evelyn. Her voice warmed through the line. How are you, dear? I swallowed, steadied my tone. If they won't eat my food, I said slowly, maybe the neighborhood will. There was a pause, and then a low, knowing laugh. Now that, Marjorie said, is the Evelyn Carter I know. What do you have in mind? And just like that, a seed was planted. I looked again at the feast spread across my dining table. What had been meant for children who mocked me would become something else. A gift. A rebellion. My so-called trash would not go to waste. It would become a lifeline. And deep inside, I whispered, let them laugh. They'll see soon enough what their mama's food can do. The first time I walked into the old community center with Marjorie, I almost laughed at myself. What business did two gray-haired women have trying to revive a place the city had practically forgotten? The linoleum floors were scuffed, curling at the edges. The paint on the walls peeled in wide flakes, dull yellow bleeding into dingy gray. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming like tired bees. The hall smelled faintly of mildew, as though it, too, had given up on being useful. But when I stood in the middle of that empty room, I didn't see decay. I saw a vision. Tables stretched end to end, covered in dishes. Children running between chairs. Neighbors laughing and clasping hands. I saw life where others saw only dust. Marjorie, bless her soul, clapped her hands together like she was about to lead a choir. Well, Evelyn, she said, this is where it begins. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Word spread faster than I expected. Mr. Jenkins, my neighbor with the kind, wrinkled face, was the first to show up. He shuffled in one morning with his cap in his hands. Evelyn, he said, I can't cook worth a lick, but I've still got my old pickup. If you need hauling, I'll do it. That simple offer made my throat tighten. That's what family should feel like, not bound by blood, but by choice. Then came more. A farmer down the road dropped off a crate of collard greens and turnips. They'd just rot otherwise, he said, setting them down with a smile. The local bakery sent loaves of bread they hadn't sold, still warm enough to steam the paper bags. Marjorie sweet-talked the pastor into lending us the church's extra string lights, tangled though they were. I even dipped into my modest retirement savings to buy the centerpiece of the feast, a turkey big enough to remind me of the ones I'd roasted in years past, back when Michael and Clara still thought my cooking mattered. The preparations turned into something like a movie montage. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, cutting paper snowflakes that ended up taped crookedly to the windows. String lights zigzagged across the ceiling, casting the whole hall in a soft golden glow. We gathered mismatched chairs from every corner of the neighborhood, wooden, plastic, one even propped on a stack of old encyclopedias because it was missing a leg. Nobody cared. A young Mexican family arrived with trays of tamales wrapped in banana leaves, their aroma rich and earthy. A retired teacher I used to work with brought cornbread dressing and insisted I taste test it. Another neighbor brought collard greens cooked slow in broth, their steam rising like an offering. I tied on my apron, rolled up my sleeves, and moved among them. Stirring pots, checking spices, giving little bits of instruction when needed. But more than cooking, I listened. A single mother told me how she worked 2 jobs, coming home bone-tired yet still worrying her children weren't eating enough. An elderly couple whispered about hospital bills so high they had to choose between paying for medicine or groceries. A teenager admitted he skipped dinner some nights so his little brothers could have seconds. Each story weighed heavy, but it also lit something inside me. My sorrow wasn't mine alone anymore. It became fuel. My heart, cracked by betrayal, found a new purpose, binding together the broken pieces of this community, one plate at a time. Of course, there were challenges. Funds ran thin. Ingredients didn't always stretch as far as we hoped. Some neighbors shook their heads, muttering that it was too ambitious. One widow and her church friend can't feed half of Savannah, one man told me with a smirk. I'd heard that tone before, from my own children. That patronizing dismissal. That belief that I was too small, too outdated, too insignificant to matter. It didn't break me then, and it sure wouldn't now. When we ran short of supplies, I found other ways. I tutored the grocer's son in algebra in exchange for fresh produce. I proofread a teenager's college essay in return for his family donating paper plates and cups. Every skill I had from decades of teaching became a kind of currency, bartered into beans, onions, flour, and napkins. Piece by piece, the feast grew, stitched together by goodwill and stubbornness. One evening, as we strung the last of the lights, Marjorie rested her hand on my arm. "You've poured yourself into this, Evelyn," she said gently. "But I know there's something else brewing inside you." I looked at her then, the snow outside glowing blue against the windows, the faint laughter of children carrying down the hall. My voice came low, steady, shaped by pain and resolve. "I'm not done with Michael and Clara. They think they can mock me, cast me aside. But they'll learn what family really means." Marjorie's eyes gleamed, half mischief, half admiration. "Then," she said, "it's time you met my old friend, Indigo Merritt. Sharpest lawyer in the South. If you're serious about teaching those children of yours a lesson, Indigo will know how to help." The name settled in my mind like a stone in a river. Indigo Merritt. I tucked it away for later. For now, I had a feast to finish. The night of the banquet arrived, and the community center no longer looked tired. It glowed. Paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling. Glitter shimmered where children's clumsy fingers had pressed it. String lights twinkled like stars against peeling paint. The air was thick with the mingled scents of roasted turkey, tamales, collards, fresh bread, and cinnamon pies. When I stepped into the hall in my flour-dusted apron, I felt something I hadn't in years: belonging. They came in droves. Families bundled in coats, elders leaning on canes, children tugging eagerly at their parents' hands. Over 100 people filled that room, voices buzzing with anticipation. I moved from table to table, clasping hands, hugging shoulders, urging them to eat their fill. "Don't be shy," I said, ladling gravy over mashed potatoes. "Go back for seconds, thirds if you want." Laughter rose and filled the hall, bouncing off walls that had once echoed with nothing but silence. For one night, none of us were alone. Then Mr. Jenkins stood, his frail frame trembling as he tapped a fork against his glass. The room quieted. "When my wife passed," he began, his voice rough but clear, "I thought I'd forgotten what kindness looked like. But Evelyn," his eyes glistened, "she brought me meals for months. She kept me fed when I couldn't feed myself. And tonight, she's given us all the same gift, belonging." Applause broke like a wave. My cheeks burned, tears prickled my eyes. This wasn't a glittering gala with chandeliers. It wasn't a country club with champagne glasses clinking. Yet here, in this patched-up hall, with folding chairs and paper decorations, I had built something real. That's when a young woman with a camera slung around her shoulder approached me. "Tina Hayes," she said brightly. "Reporter with the Savannah Gazette. Miss Carter, would you mind if we filmed? People should see what you've created." I hesitated, then nodded. Her camera whirred as she captured children giggling with plates piled high, neighbors clinking cups, me carving the turkey with flour on my cheek and joy in my heart. These weren't just pictures. They were proof that one woman's rejected feast had turned into a banquet for many. And somewhere across town, in a mansion filled with chandeliers and champagne flutes, I knew my children were sipping and smiling, thinking they'd chosen better. But soon enough, they'd see my face in the paper. Soon enough, they'd learn what their mama was capable of. The banquet filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. But when the last dish was scrubbed clean, the lights switched off, and the hall grew quiet again, the ache returned. It was sharper now. Not just grief, but anger. My children hadn't simply abandoned me, they mocked me. They treated me as though I were nothing but an inconvenience, a relic from another time. I could have left it at that, content with the joy of one evening. But betrayal is a parasite. It gnaws at you in the quiet hours, curls itself around your ribs. And I knew then, this story wasn't finished. There had to be more. Something lasting. Something that would outlive even me. That was when Marjorie leaned close one evening, her voice soft but firm. It's time you meet Indigo Merritt. The very next morning, I found myself seated across from her in an office that smelled faintly of leather and cedar polish. Indigo Merritt was in her 50s, a woman carved of sharp angles and sharper eyes. She had a presence that made you sit straighter without even being told. Her hair was salt and pepper, pulled back in a smooth bun. A deep emerald scarf was draped across her shoulders, and she tapped her fountain pen against a leather-bound notebook as she studied me. "Mrs. Carter," she said at last, folding her hands neatly. "Marjorie tells me you're looking to make some changes to your estate. Why don't you tell me what's on your mind?" For a moment, shame prickled under my skin. Speaking of money always felt vulgar, especially when my own children treated me like I had none. But slowly, the truth spilled out. The modest home I lived in was only part of the picture. Harold, God rest his soul, had left behind 2 other properties, a small rental house his parents had passed down, and a lakeside cabin we once dreamed of retiring to. Together, with the market as it stood, they were worth over $1 million. Indigo's eyebrows rose slightly, though her face remained composed. "That," she said evenly, "is no small inheritance. I assume your children believe these assets will come to them." "Yes." The word was bitter on my tongue. They assume. They never ask. They never thank. They only expect. Indigo leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. "And do you wish to honor that expectation?" A laugh slipped out of me, low, sharp, without joy. "Honor?" I repeated. They threw me away. Called my food trash. Called me outdated, stuck in the past. I spent my life sacrificing for them, and in return, they sneer behind my back. "No, Miss Merritt. I will not reward cruelty." Her lips curved into the faintest hint of approval. "Then tell me, Mrs. Carter. Who do you want this wealth to serve?" My mind drifted back to the banquet, the single mother laughing as her children licked pie from their fingers. The elderly couple swaying slowly to a tune strummed on a borrowed guitar. Mr. Jenkins raising his glass, his eyes shining with tears. "I want my legacy," I said firmly, "to feed those who never had enough. To shelter those who never had a home. To care for those the world overlooks." My children turned their backs on me. My community opened their arms. That's where my legacy belongs. Indigo's pen scratched swiftly across her notebook. "Then we will make it so. We'll establish a trust that donates both properties to a community foundation. We'll ensure the will is airtight, no loopholes, no contesting. If your children try to fight it, they'll find themselves facing an iron wall." As she spoke, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't about bitterness anymore. It wasn't even about loneliness. This was justice. By the time I signed my name, the ink pressing deep into the paper, my heart felt less fragile. It felt forged in fire. Walking out of that office into the cold Savannah air, I whispered to myself. This isn't just a banquet anymore. This is revenge with purpose. Whispers travel fast in a town like mine. By the second week of January, I felt the shift. Neighbors glanced at me with curious smiles. People spoke not just of the banquet, but of papers signed, of legacies no longer promised. And then came the knock. Hard. Insistent. Rattling the frame of my front door. When I opened it, there stood Michael. His face was tight with rage, his jaw clenched so hard the vein in his temple pulsed. Clara hovered just behind him, her expression pinched with guilt. And Vanessa, Lord help me, Vanessa swept past them both without waiting to be invited in, her heels clicking against my hardwood floor like knives. She turned, eyes blazing. That money is ours, she snapped. You can't just give it away. I shut the door quietly behind them, taking in the sight of my own children standing there, grown adults looking at me not with love but with greed. My heart ached, but my face remained calm. Michael stepped forward, fists clenched. Mom, he said, his voice harsh. After everything, we deserve it. The house, the cabin, all of it. We're your family. Who else would it go to? I let the silence stretch, heavy as stone. Then I spoke, each syllable deliberate. After everything, you abandoned me. Clara flinched. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Vanessa scoffed, her lips curling. Abandoned? Don't be dramatic. We were busy. We have lives. You should be grateful we even visit. A smile tugged at my lips, but it wasn't amusement. It was sorrow turned to steel. Visit? I echoed. You left me alone at my own table. Mocked my food. Mocked me. And you call it busyness? No, Vanessa. That isn't busy. That is betrayal. Michael's voice rose, desperate now. Mom, you don't understand. The party was important. Connections, clients. Not personal, he stammered. Not personal, I repeated, shaking my head. Everything about it was personal. You chose strangers over your own mother. You chose status over family. The room thickened with silence. The mantel clock ticked slowly, cruelly, as though counting down to some inevitable truth. I drew a deep breath and delivered it. The properties you thought were yours? They're no longer in your grasp. I've signed them over to a foundation. Families who cannot pay rent will find shelter. Children who go hungry will eat. Elders who cannot afford medicine will be cared for. That is where my legacy belongs. Clara's eyes filled with tears, whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Mom, she whispered. You don't mean that. I turned to her, my voice softer, but unyielding. I mean every word. You chose a party over me. I chose my community over you. Vanessa's face twisted with fury. But Michael's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. His eyes flickered to mine, searching for mercy. But I had none left to give, not the kind they wanted. My mercy had already been spent, poured into sacrifices they had long forgotten. I stepped past them, my hand on the doorknob. My voice came low, almost a whisper, but sharper than a scream. The will is signed. Airtight. There is nothing you can do. With that, I pulled the door wide. The winter air rushed in, crisp, biting, clean. They stood frozen, entitlement crumbling to dust before my eyes. Michael's jaw clenched. Clara's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Vanessa glared daggers that could have cut stone. But none of them spoke. I walked out onto the porch, letting the door swing shut behind me. The cold bit at my skin, but inside, I felt only fire, steady, unshakable. For once, it wasn't me left behind. It was them. Recognition wasn't what I had been seeking, but it found me anyway. One chilly evening, a letter arrived in the mail, embossed with the city seal. Inside was an invitation from the mayor himself, an award ceremony for outstanding community service. My name, Evelyn Carter, written in gold across the page. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one that had once been set for children who never came, and simply stared at the letter. For a moment, I thought it must have been sent to the wrong person. Me? A retired schoolteacher, a widow, a grandmother with arthritis in her knees? But there it was. My name. On the day of the ceremony, I stood on the steps of Savannah City Hall, my breath clouding in the frosty air. Inside, the hall glowed with chandeliers and polished wood, but it was filled not with elites in gowns and tuxedos, but with neighbors, real people whose hands had helped carry chairs, whose laughter had filled the banquet, whose stomachs had been warmed by the food we'd shared. Marjorie squeezed my hand as the mayor spoke at the podium. Evelyn Carter turned loneliness into generosity, he said, his voice echoing across the vaulted chamber. She turned betrayal into belonging. Her holiday feast fed not only the hungry, but the spirit of our city. Applause rose up, rattling the windows. I walked slowly to the stage, my legs trembling but my back straight. The mayor pressed a plaque into my hands. Just a small rectangle of polished wood and brass, but heavy with meaning. As the crowd clapped, I felt tears sting my eyes. It wasn't about honor. It was about proof that my life still mattered, that my work, my food, my stubborn love had built something stronger than the contempt of my own children. Tina Hayes, the young reporter who'd filmed the banquet, was there too. She snapped photos, scribbled notes, and the next day, her follow-up story spread like wildfire. Savannah Grandmother's Banquet sparks a movement. I saw my own face, flour still dusting my cheek, apron tied tight, on screens I never even touched. Letters began arriving from as far as Texas, Ohio, and California. Strangers wrote to say they'd been inspired to host their own neighborhood meals. Churches organized community potlucks in my name. One woman wrote, "Your story saved me from giving up. You reminded me people still care." I hadn't just filled plates. I'd sparked a fire. But recognition casts shadows, too. It wasn't long before Michael and Clara came back to my doorstep. This time without Vanessa, who had made her contempt plain enough. Michael looked worn, his tie crooked, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. Clara's face was softer, streaked with tears before she even spoke. "Mom," Michael began, his voice lower, almost rehearsed. "We're sorry. We should never have left you alone that night. We made a mistake." Clara stepped forward, clutching my hand like a child again. "You've always done everything for us," she whispered. We lost sight of that. Once upon a time, those words would have melted me. Once, I would have forgiven with open arms, desperate for reconciliation. But now, I heard the hollow ring beneath their apology. They weren't sorry for the pain. They were sorry for the inheritance they'd lost. The air between us felt heavy, filled with the things they didn't say aloud. Undo the will. Give us back what we believe is ours. I listened silently until they were finished. Then I let out a slow breath. "I forgive you," I said softly. Their shoulders relaxed, hope flickering in their eyes. "But forgiveness," I continued, my voice hardening like iron, "is not the same as forgetting. And it is not surrender." Clara's lip trembled. Michael's jaw tightened. "I've found my family," I said, steady as stone. "And it isn't you." The words landed between us like thunder. They left soon after, pale with disbelief, as if they had seen a stranger in my place. But I felt no guilt. Only release. That weekend, I hosted another supper. This time in my own home. Marjorie poured wine as Mr. Jenkins told stories that had the younger ones doubled over with laughter. Children chased each other down my hallway, giggling until their mothers scolded them with half-smiles. The walls that once echoed with silence now rang with joy. Later that night, after the plates were cleared and the house grew quiet again, I stepped onto my porch. The air was cool, the sky painted in streaks of gold and crimson as the sun set behind the oaks. I held the mayor's plaque against my chest, its polished brass catching the last light. And the words rose up, steady and true. I cooked for days, waiting for family that never came. The world came instead. And my will, like my table, belongs to them now. I smiled, not in sorrow, but in peace. There comes a time in life when you realize family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by the people who show up when you need them most. I learned that respect cannot be begged. It must be earned. Love cannot survive where there is only entitlement. And the moment I stopped chasing after those who dismissed me, I discovered a wider family, neighbors, strangers, children and elders, who gave back what my own children withheld. I thought I had lost everything when Michael and Clara turned away. But I see now. I gained more than I ever imagined. Because the truth is simple. Blood abandoned me. Community saved me. And I will never be lonely again. Thank you for watching Evelyn's story. Her journey is a powerful reminder that love and family are defined by the people who show up, not just the ones we share DNA with. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, which part of Evelyn's journey struck you the most? Until next time, take care, and remember, community is family too.